What if one of the pennies sitting in your collection right now is far more interesting than it looks? Not because every old penny is rare. Not because every 1975, 1977 D, or 1989 Lincoln cent is secretly worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. But because sometimes, the difference between an ordinary penny and a highly collectible example can be so small that you could hold it in your hand and never notice it. A tiny line. A subtle doubled detail. A particular mint mark. A nearly perfect surface. A design change hidden in a place most people never examine. And that's what makes these three Lincoln pennies so fascinating. The asterisk 1975 Lincoln cent. The asterisk 1977D Lincoln cent. And the asterisk 1989 Lincoln cent. At first glance, they look like ordinary pocket change. But look closer, and each one tells a completely different story. One takes us into the world of doubled dies and die varieties. Another shows just how dramatically condition can affect the desirability of a coin. And the third contains a subtle design change that many people could look at hundreds of times without ever realizing it was there. And here's the shocking part. Some collectors spend years learning to recognize these tiny differences. Yet the average person may spend one of these coins without even looking at it. So before you throw an old Lincoln penny into a jar, spend it at a store, or dismiss it because you've seen thousands of pennies just like it, take a closer look. Because today we're going to examine these three coins from the date to the mint mark, from the obverse to the reverse, from possible varieties to condition, errors, and collector value. And near the end, we're going to put all three side by side and answer one very important question. If you found all three in your collection today, which one would deserve your closest attention? Let's begin with the 1975 Lincoln cent. The 1975 penny is not a coin that looks rare. And that's exactly why it can be so easy to overlook. It belongs to the enormous Lincoln Memorial Cent series, a series that became one of the most familiar forms of American pocket change. By 1975, the Lincoln Memorial design had already been circulating for more than a decade. Millions of Americans handled these coins every day. They were used for purchases. They were dropped into vending machines. They were placed in cash registers. They were saved in jars. They were thrown into drawers. And some eventually disappeared into old collections. So when someone sees a 1975 penny today, the natural reaction is usually simple. It's just an old penny. But collectors don't stop at the first glance. They ask a different question. Is this particular coin different? That one question can completely change the way you look at a coin. Because a common date can still have collectible varieties. And the 1975 cent gives us a perfect example. One documented variety is WDDO001, a double die obverse variety listed by Wechsler's die variety files. And this is where things get interesting. The doubling isn't something you should expect to see across the entire coin. Instead, the variety has specific characteristics. Wechsler identifies class IV doubling toward the west on parts of the date, and on the letters R, T, and Y of Liberty. Now imagine finding a 1975 penny and noticing something strange around those areas. Maybe the date doesn't look quite right. Maybe one of the letters appears to have a second contour. Maybe you notice a line that seems to run alongside part of the lettering. Would you immediately call it a rare doubled die? No, and this is where smart collecting begins. Because one of the biggest mistakes beginners make is assuming that anything that looks doubled must be a valuable doubled die. That's not how it works. Coins can experience machine doubling. Coins can be scratched. Coins can be damaged. Coins can be hit after leaving the mint. And environmental exposure can create strange-looking surfaces. So the real challenge isn't simply finding something unusual. The real challenge is proving that the unusual feature is actually part of the coin's manufacturing history. That's why magnification matters. That's why lighting matters. And that's why comparison matters. Take your 1975 penny. Don't stare at it for 2 seconds and move on. Put it under good light. Tilt it. Rotate it. Look at the date. Look at Liberty. Then look at the rest of the obverse. And ask yourself, does the feature look raised? Does it have the characteristics of genuine hub doubling? Does it match known photographs? Does it occur exactly where the documented variety is supposed to occur? Those questions are much more important than simply asking how much money the coin might be worth. Because if you find a genuine documented variety, you have something worth researching. If you don't, you may simply have a damaged or normally struck coin. And that's okay. The majority of coins you search will be normal. The excitement comes from knowing what normal looks like. Think about that for a moment. A person who has never studied Lincoln cents sees hundreds of coins and sees hundreds of pennies. A collector sees the same pile and starts separating possibilities. This one has an unusual date. That one has an interesting mint mark. This one has exceptional color. That one has possible doubling. And another appears to have damage. The coins haven't changed. The collector's knowledge has changed. That's what you're developing when you search these pennies. Now let's talk about the composition of the 1975 cent. This is another reason the date matters. The 1975 cent belongs to the pre-1982 era of Lincoln cents, before the mint transitioned to copper-plated zinc for regular cents. That means a normal 1975 cent has the traditional copper-based composition associated with this earlier period. This becomes particularly useful when comparing it with our third coin, the 1989 cent. Because the 1989 cent belongs to an entirely different composition era. And that difference is something you can actually feel. Pick up a typical older copper cent. Then compare it with a later copper-plated zinc cent. The weight is different. The composition is different. The way the surfaces age can be different. And the way collectors evaluate them can also be different. But don't make the mistake of assuming that copper automatically equals valuable. There are huge numbers of copper Lincoln cents. Composition is part of identification. It is not automatically a jackpot. That's an important distinction. Now look again at the 1975 penny. Check the mint mark. If you're looking at a circulation strike from Philadelphia, there is no mint mark. If you see a day, you're looking at a Denver issue. And if you encounter an S, you need to determine whether you're dealing with a San Francisco issue and whether it is a proof. This is why the year alone isn't enough. A coin should be identified by date, mint mark, type, and condition. That is the foundation. And once you have the foundation, you can start looking for something extraordinary. Now imagine you have 10 1975 pennies. Would you examine all 10 in exactly the same way? You could, but there's a smarter approach. First, remove the heavily damaged coins. Then separate the coins that have unusually attractive surfaces. Then look for possible varieties. Then compare the most interesting candidates against reliable references. This approach saves time. And it also prevents you from becoming overwhelmed by every tiny scratch and mark. Because here's another secret of coin hunting. Not every strange-looking coin is interesting. Sometimes a strange-looking coin is just damaged. And learning to recognize damage is almost as important as learning to recognize errors. A scratch cuts into the surface. A genuine raised die feature comes from the striking process. A postmint dent can flatten part of the design. A true striking error can change the relationship between the design and the planchet. Understanding those differences is what turns coin hunting from guessing into research. Now let's move to our second coin. The asterisk 1977D Lincoln cent. And this is where the story takes a surprising turn. Because the 1977D is not famous simply because it is scarce. In fact, it had an enormous mintage. PCGS lists the 1977D Lincoln cent mintage at more than asterisk 19 billion coins asterisk. Read that number again. More than 4 billion. So if someone tells you that every 1977D penny is rare because it is old, that should immediately raise a red flag. There were simply too many produced. But here's where things get fascinating. A coin can be common in existence and still be difficult to find in exceptional condition. That's a completely different kind of rarity. Imagine 4 billion coins leaving the mint. They don't all survive equally. Some are thrown into circulation. Some are scratched. Some are dropped. Some are exposed to moisture. Some are cleaned. Some develop spots. Some are damaged. And some are carefully preserved. Decades later, the population of truly exceptional examples becomes much smaller. This is where the 1977D gets interesting. Instead of asking, is the 1977D rare? A better question is, how rare is a truly exceptional 1977D? And that question leads us into the world of high-grade Lincoln cents. Now look at the surfaces of your 1977D. Don't just look at the color. Look at everything. Lincoln's cheek, the fields around his portrait, the hair, the jawline, the lettering, the rims, then flip it over. Look at the memorial. Look at the open fields around the building. Look for contact marks. Look for scratches. Look for spots. Look for discoloration. Look at the overall strike. A coin can look beautiful from a distance and show dozens of marks under magnification. That's why serious grading is so demanding. And here's where the story gets genuinely surprising. PCGS records an auction result of **7050** for a 1977D Lincoln cent graded *MS 68RD, sold by Heritage Auctions in 2016. $7,050 for a 1-cent coin. But don't misunderstand what that number means. It does not mean every 1977D penny is worth $7,050. It doesn't mean your circulated example is automatically valuable. It means that an extraordinarily high-grade example can exist in a completely different market category from an ordinary circulated coin. That distinction is everything. Imagine two 1977D pennies. One has been in circulation for 40 years. It is brown. It has scratches. The edges are worn. Lincoln's cheek has contact marks. The reverse has visible wear. The other coin has brilliant, original red color. The details are exceptionally sharp. The surfaces are remarkably clean. The coin has survived with almost no visible evidence of circulation. They carry the same date, the same mint mark, the same basic design. But collectors may view them very differently. That's the power of condition. And this is one of the most important lessons you can take away from this entire video. The date tells you what the coin is. The condition can tell you how special your example might be. Now look at the color. Lincoln cents are often discussed in terms of brown, red-brown, and red. Why? Because copper changes over time. Exposure to air, moisture, chemicals, and other environmental factors can alter the surface. A naturally preserved red cent can be highly desirable. But a shiny coin isn't automatically a red coin worth money. A coin can be cleaned. A coin can be chemically altered. A coin can be artificially brightened. So don't chase brightness. Chase originality. That is a much better rule. If your 1977 D penny appears unusually beautiful, resist the temptation to polish it. Don't rub it. Don't wash it. Don't use vinegar. Don't use metal polish. Don't try to make it look new. You could destroy the very surfaces that make it interesting. And once those surfaces are damaged, you can't simply undo the damage. This is why experienced collectors handle coins carefully. Hold them by the edges. Avoid touching the surfaces unnecessarily. Store them properly. And if you believe you found an exceptional coin, preserve it exactly as it is. Now let's look at the reverse. The memorial building is not just decoration. It can help you evaluate strike quality. Look at the details. Look at the columns. Look at the lettering. Look at the rims. Look for abnormalities. And then look for errors. Could the coin be off-center? Could it have a die crack? Could there be a struck-through area? Could there be another legitimate mint-made anomaly? Possibly. But remember our rule. A strange coin is not automatically an error. The feature has to make sense. A real off-center strike has a recognizable pattern. A real die crack is raised and follows a path created by a damaged die. A struck-through error has characteristics associated with foreign material interfering with the strike. Postmint damage is different. The more you understand the manufacturing process, the easier it becomes to separate these categories. And that brings us to one of the most exciting parts of the hobby. The mint was producing millions of coins under enormous pressure and speed. Most coins came out correctly, but occasionally something went wrong. A die could develop a crack. A planchet could be improperly positioned. A foreign object could interfere with the strike. A die could have a variety. And those small manufacturing events could create coins that collectors would later search for decades afterward. That's why a coin from 1977 can still surprise someone today. It has spent almost half a century waiting to be noticed. Now let's move to the third coin. The asterisk 1989 Lincoln cent. And this one has a secret that isn't necessarily an error at all. It's a design change. That's important, because sometimes the most interesting thing about a coin is not a mistake. It's something the mint intentionally changed. The 1989 Lincoln cent is part of the copper-plated zinc era. But it also belongs to an important moment in the memorial cent's design history. In 1989, the mint introduced a modified version of the memorial reverse design. The change was subtle. So subtle that most people wouldn't notice it. But collectors can identify it. And one of the places to look is the designer's initials, *FG*. According to Wexler's die variety files, the modified memorial reverse has a distinct feature involving the G. The upper left side of the vertical bar of the G has a serif, and the vertical bar extends farther downward than on the earlier design. Now that may not sound shocking, but imagine holding a 1989 penny and realizing that the reverse you're looking at is part of a design transition. You've probably seen that coin dozens of times, maybe hundreds, and you may never have noticed. That's what makes coin collecting addictive. The discovery isn't always a massive price tag. Sometimes the discovery is realizing that something you thought was ordinary has a story. The 1989 cent has that story. And once you know what to look for, you can compare it with earlier memorial cents. Look at an older coin. Look at the FG initials. Then look at the 1989. The differences become easier to understand. And suddenly, the coin doesn't look quite so ordinary anymore. Now let's talk about the composition. The 1989 cent is copper-plated zinc. That means the core is zinc with a thin copper layer on the outside. This is very different from the traditional copper-based composition of the 1975 cent. And because of this, the 1989 cent can become particularly interesting when collectors encounter unusual weights or suspected planchet errors. But this is where you have to be careful. Suppose you find a 1989 penny that seems heavy. You weigh it. The number is different from what you expected. Does that automatically mean you found a rare error? No. First, verify the scale. Then weigh several normal 1989 cents. Check the diameter. Check the edge. Check the surface. Look for damage. Look for signs of plating problems. And if everything points toward an unusual composition, seek professional authentication. The internet is full of stories about rare pennies supposedly made from the wrong metal. Some stories are based on genuine errors. Others are based on misunderstanding. Some involve altered coins. Some involve damaged coins. And some are simply incorrect. The difference between a legitimate discovery and an internet rumor is evidence. Always remember that. Now, here's another reason the 1989 cent deserves attention. It shows us that a coin doesn't have to be rare to be historically important. Millions of 1989 cents exist. But the design modification gives collectors another layer to study. And once you understand design varieties, you start seeing other coins differently. You begin asking, was this design changed? Did the mint modify the lettering? Did the position of the initials change? Did the portrait change? Was the reverse modified? Did the die style change? Those questions can lead you into some of the most fascinating areas of numismatics. Now let's put the three coins together. 1975, 1977 D, 1989. If these three pennies were sitting on your table, which one would you pick first? You might choose the 1975 because of the documented double die variety. You might choose the 1977 D because of its incredible high-grade potential. Or you might choose the 1989 because of the hidden reverse design change. But here's the trick. There isn't one universal answer. It depends on what you're searching for. If you're a variety hunter, the 1975 deserves serious attention. If you're a condition hunter, the 1977 D deserves serious attention. If you're studying design changes and later memorial cents, the 1989 deserves serious attention. That's why experienced collectors don't ask only, what is the most valuable? They ask, what is interesting about this particular coin? That mindset changes everything. Now let's imagine you're searching a jar containing 1,000 Lincoln cents. Would you really inspect every coin for 5 minutes? Probably not. You'd be there all night. Instead, you use a system. First, identify the dates. Then pull out interesting mint marks. Then separate the best preserved examples. Then inspect known varieties. Then investigate anything unusual. This is how large-scale coin searching becomes manageable. And eventually, you develop something collectors call an eye. You begin recognizing coins that deserve a second look. You notice the surfaces. You notice the color. You notice the strike. You notice the date. You notice the mint mark. You notice when something doesn't look right. That's the skill you're really building. Now let's talk about value. This is probably the question most people want answered. How much is my penny worth? The honest answer is, it depends. The date is only the beginning. Mint mark matters. Condition matters. Color matters. Variety matters. Error status matters. Authentication matters. Market demand matters. And grade matters enormously for some coins. A normal circulated 1975 penny isn't suddenly worth hundreds simply because it's from 1975. A normal 1977 D isn't automatically worth thousands because one exceptional example sold for $7,050. A normal 1989 cent isn't automatically valuable because the reverse design was modified. But an individual coin can become much more interesting if it has a recognized variety, genuine mint era, exceptional grade, or another documented characteristic. That's the responsible way to discuss coin values. And it also protects you from scams. If someone tells you that every old penny is worth thousands, be skeptical. If someone says a tiny scratch is a rare mint era, be skeptical. If someone says you can clean a penny to increase its value, be skeptical. And if someone gives you a price without knowing the grade, variety, condition, and authenticity, be skeptical. Coin collecting requires evidence. Now let's go deeper into the 1975 double die hunt. Suppose you find doubling on the date. What do? First, photograph it. Second, compare it with a known example. Third, examine the exact location. Fourth, determine whether the doubling is raised and consistent with die doubling. Fifth, check whether the rest of the diagnostics match. And only then should you start thinking about attribution. This is important because the value of a recognized variety comes from identification. A random mark doesn't become a variety because it looks interesting. The variety has to be documented. And this is where professional variety references become incredibly useful. For the 1975 WDD0001, the reference points you towards specific doubling on the date and liberty. That gives you something concrete to search for. Now let's go back to the 1977 D. What if your coin doesn't have an obvious error? It could still be worth examining. Why? Because condition itself can be the story. Look at the fields. Are they smooth? Are they heavily marked? Does the coin have its original color? Are there signs of cleaning? Are the devices sharp? Is the strike strong? A coin doesn't have to have an error to be collectible. Sometimes the coin's condition is the reason collectors want it. This is particularly true for dates where ordinary examples are common, but elite grade examples are much harder to find. The 1977 D is a great example of that concept. 4 billion coins were produced. But an MS68 RD example bringing thousands tells us that the top of the grading scale can be a completely different world. And that's why collectors inspect condition so carefully. Now consider the 1989 again. Most people would never think of looking at the FG initials. But once you know that the reverse was modified, those initials become a clue. That's the beauty of numismatics. Knowledge changes what you see. A beginner sees a penny. A collector sees a design. A variety hunter sees diagnostics. A grader sees surfaces. A historian sees a piece of the mint's production story. Same coin, different perspective. Now here's something you should do if you own these coins. Take one 1975. Take one 1977 D. Take one 1989. Place them next to each other. Don't look at the values. Look at the coins themselves. Compare the color. Compare the surfaces. Compare the weight. Compare the design. Compare the reverse. Compare the mint marks. You'll immediately notice that they belong to different moments in Lincoln cent history. The 1975 represents the earlier copper-based memorial cent period. The 1977 die shows us the huge production era and the importance of high-grade preservation. The 1989 represents the later copper-plated zinc era and the modified memorial reverse. 3 pennies. 3 stories. 1 long-running coin series. And that is why Lincoln cents remain so popular. They're accessible. They're familiar. And they're full of details. You don't need a museum collection to start. You can start with pocket change. You can start with a jar. You can start with coins from your grandparents. You can start with a handful of pennies from a bankroll. And then you learn. You make mistakes. You discover machine doubling. You discover damaged coins. You discover genuine varieties. And eventually, you learn to recognize the difference. That's where the real fun begins. Now let's talk about one final warning. If you think you found a valuable coin, don't immediately clean it. Don't scratch the surface to test the metal. Don't cut it. Don't polish it. Don't try to remove discoloration. Don't use household chemicals. And don't alter the coin in any way. Preservation comes first. If the coin is potentially valuable, its original condition is part of the evidence. The safest approach is to photograph it, store it properly, and seek expert guidance. And if you believe it may be a major error or rare variety, professional authentication can be especially important. Because the more valuable the claim becomes, the more important authentication becomes. Now let's revisit our biggest surprises. The first surprise is the 1975. It looks ordinary, but documented double-die varieties exist. And the key is not simply seeing something that looks doubled. The key is matching the specific characteristics. The second surprise is the 1977D. More than 4 billion were produced. Yet an exceptional MS68RD example reached $7,050 at auction. That tells us something powerful. Rarity can exist in condition, not just in mintage. And the third surprise is the 1989. The coin isn't famous because every example is rare. It's interesting because the memorial reverse was modified, and the change can be identified through subtle design details. These three lessons are more valuable than simply memorizing a price. Because prices change. Markets change. But the ability to identify a coin remains useful. Now imagine finding one of these pennies tomorrow. You see the date. 1975. You stop. You inspect the date. You inspect Liberty. You see something unusual. Instead of spending it, you put it aside. You compare it with a reference. And suddenly, that ordinary penny becomes a research project. Or maybe you find a 1977D. It looks incredibly clean. You notice the original red color. The surfaces are almost untouched. Instead of throwing it into a jar with hundreds of other pennies, you preserve it. Maybe it deserves professional evaluation. Or maybe you find a 1989. You flip it over. You remember the modified memorial reverse. You examine the FG initials. And suddenly, you realize something you never noticed before. That's the moment coin collecting becomes addictive. Not when someone tells you a coin is worth a certain amount, but when you discover something yourself. Because there is a special feeling in finding a detail that thousands of other people may have ignored. That's why people search rolls. That's why they search jars. That's why they examine old collections. That's why they spend hours under magnification. Because every coin is an opportunity to learn something. And occasionally, one of those coins really is extraordinary. So which of these three should you check first? If I had to choose based purely on variety interest, I would start with the *1975**. I'd inspect the date and Liberty carefully and compare the coin against documented double-die diagnostics. Then I'd examine the *1977D**, especially if the coin appeared to be in exceptional condition. I'd look closely at the surfaces, original color, strike, and contact marks. And then I'd examine the *1989**, paying special attention to the modified memorial reverse and the FG initials. But I wouldn't throw any of them away without looking. That's the point. Not because all three are valuable, but because each one has something worth learning. And that is perhaps the most important lesson of all. Don't search for valuable coins, search for differences. When you find a difference, investigate it. When you find something unusual, compare it. When you find a possible variety, verify it. When you find an exceptional coin, preserve it. And when you find something you can't explain, don't guess. Research. Because sometimes the most interesting discoveries begin with a simple thought. Something about this penny looks different. So the next time you see a 1975 Lincoln cent, don't dismiss it. Look at the date. Look at Liberty. Look at the mint mark. Look at the surfaces. Look for documented doubling. Then take a second look. When you see a 1977 D, don't assume that billions produced means there's nothing interesting to find. Look at the condition. Look at the color. Look at the surfaces. Look at the strike. Ask whether your particular example is unusually well preserved. And when you see a 1989, flip it over. Look at the memorial. Look at the FG initials. Look for the modified reverse design. Because the detail most people ignore can sometimes be the detail that tells you exactly what you're holding. These pennies may have started their lives as 1-cent pieces. But decades later, they can become pieces of history. The 1975 can introduce you to doubled dies. The 1977 D can teach you about condition rarity. The 1989 can reveal the hidden evolution of the Lincoln Memorial design. And all three can teach you the most important rule in coin collecting. Never judge a coin from a distance. Get closer. Look under magnification. Turn it over. Check the date. Check the mint mark. Check the surfaces. And most importantly, learn what normal looks like. Because once you know normal, unusual becomes much easier to recognize. And maybe that's why Lincoln cents remain one of the greatest coins for beginners and experienced collectors alike. They're everywhere. They're inexpensive to search. They're packed with history. And sometimes, hidden among ordinary examples, there is a coin that makes you stop and look twice. Not every penny will be rare. Not every era will be valuable. Not every variety will bring a fortune. But every unusual coin has a story. And sometimes, the story is worth far more than the 1 cent stamped on the coin. So before you spend your next 1975, 1977 D, or 1989 Lincoln penny, stop, turn it over, look closer, because you may be holding nothing more than an ordinary penny. Or you may be holding a coin that deserves a second look. And you won't know which one it is until you check. That's the real thrill of coin hunting. The possibility isn't in every coin. It's in the next coin. And the next one. And the next one. So keep searching. Keep learning. And never underestimate the smallest coin in your pocket. Because sometimes, the smallest details tell the biggest stories.